All right. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are here with Colin Cloud, the deductionist from the Illusionists live from Broadway, backstage pre-show at the North Carolina Performing Arts Center in North Charleston, South Carolina. I had to get that right.
That's the one.
That's the one. Mr. Colin, got a lot of stuff I want to ask you.
Okay.
First of all, give us just a quick synopsis of people who may not know exactly who you are. You started in Scotland, magic, and went into mentalism. How did that work?
Yeah, never really magic. It was hypnotism. I did hypnotism and then got into mentalism and then realized mentalism was basically, linked to magic very heavily. So then dabbled in some of the magic that crossed over. But no, genuinely started by reading about Sherlock Holmes, thought that was amazing, how can people do that? And realized, you can't really. So then it was a case of learning all the other skills that kind of helped you to replicate that type of thing. Hypnotism, got involved with stand-up comedy, went to university quite young studying forensic investigation, and then mixed it all together, performed at the Edinburgh Festival for a number of years, and then Simon Painter found out about me and joined the Illusionists.
Wow, great, concise, really good. I sort of figured you might have gone through the magic period, but you really didn't go through that at much at all.
No, honestly, the truth is my cousin, I got a magic kit for Christmas, the Paul Daniels magic kit. Yeah. My cousin, she learned all the tricks immediately. She performed them for the family. I hated her, and as a result, hated magic because she could do them and I couldn't.
Right. And now you mentioned hypnosis. I used to do it for a few years myself, and you said did you mention just now that you found out it was all fake? Is that what you meant?
No. Like Sherlock Holmes, being able to just do all that stuff like off the cuff was harder than Arthur Conan Doyle made it sound. But no, hypnotism. Paul McKenna, I don't know if he was huge in the UK. When I was growing up, and that fascinated me. How can someone just talk to people and make them fall asleep? And I've realized I now do that on a nightly basis just with my act, so that's devastating. But no, that was amazing. So I thought I want to learn how to do that, and realized you need to have a certain presence to make it work. So I had to go away, learn to develop that confidence.
But you did shows, hypnosis, performances.
Hypnosis. I still use in my solo shows in Edinburgh quite a lot of hypnosis. I just don't really label it as that.
Right.
But yeah, a lot of it is hypnotism.
And you think that mentalism was a better vehicle for what you wanted to do? Did you do it, was it because of monetary reasons or other reasons you...
No, a lot of the mentalism that I saw growing up, I thought was, and read about was, not all of it, and this isn't to disrespect anyone, but a lot of it was quite boring and slow, I felt. And that could have been me trying to perform it, and that being me that was boring and like doing it too slowly and getting the pace wrong. Magic always had the allure of being visual, snappy, quick, and it was like, right, what's the... Not that I'm saying anyone needs to make mentalism that. There's a time and a place for everything, but in the environments I found myself in, the slower procedural type mentalism was just not working. When people they'd been drinking or, free bar.
And you went through that phase.
Oh yeah. Through the phase of what?
Of the slower mentalism?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and again, I take full responsibility for probably doing stuff not the way the guys that created it would have been doing it. But ever the way when you read something, you need to interpret that yourself and go try and play with it. And the way I imagined myself doing it just didn't work in those real environments where there were free bars and people are a bit intoxicated and, it's late at night. People are, so it was like, right, so how do you then take that and make it more appealing to people in those environments? And that's sort of the venues that I grew up performing in Glasgow and in Edinburgh, in the cabaret scene during university, and then a few years after that, that's where I had to get my licks, as it were.
So I've seen lots of mentalists. Mm-hmm. You obviously have too, and I would say arguably you are probably the most famous mentalist in the world at this point because of your exposure in the Illusionists and America's Got Talent, Edinburgh, the Fringe festivals. I mean, it seems like you're probably exposed more than just about anybody at this point in time in the mentalist. Would you agree with that?
I mean, I hope that I'm up there. I mean, Darren has obviously... Well, Darren and Andy have revolutionized all of mentalism. So,
sure.
The fact that any of us are currently doing mentalism...
It's probably because of that.
Not probably. Definitely because of...
Yeah, sure.
They took everything that I thought was potentially wrong with mentalism and they just flipped it on its head, and they ironed out every wrinkle and made it like this.
So would you call so I guess mentalism, traditionally speaking, in the Corinda day and the 13 step, I mean, now would you say it's more, you'd like to label it something else, like maybe a perception?
I think the Corinda stuff, let's bear in mind that stuff came out before the likes of YouTube and an era and a generation of people used to changing the channel every 4 seconds on average and seeing clip after clip of like summarized information. I don't think people have the attention span, unfortunately,
yes,
for the most part, that they maybe did 80, 90 years ago when that stuff was in its prime. So I feel like, and obviously Darren has the persona where people are going to see him, and his show is it's an event for people.
It is great.
When people come to see me in the Illusionists, people come to see the Illusionists, they're not necessarily coming to see me, they're coming to see a magic show, full stop. So for my stuff to even function in this capacity, I learned very early on that it couldn't resort back to that. It had to stay that snappy, quick, involved.
Well, but now to be fair to yourself, I mean, I saw you the first day out. I mean, the first time in the Mentalist, right? I mean, in the Illusionist, and I saw what you did, and you were like a full speed ahead train to start out with. I mean, obviously that was what you did. It's not like you made it up for this show.
Yeah.
That you were already doing that sort of high energy, fast-paced mentalism.
Yeah, and that totally links back to those nightclub, cabaret environments in Edinburgh, where I had to learn to engage people who in that case were, a bit drunk and a bit like loud. And
I always say you have to actually slap those type of audiences. You have to go out and actually get a hold of them.
Well, every night in my mind, forgive the language here, but I imagined walking out, grabbing them by the balls and not letting go until I walked off stage. And it's like, right, what is every trick in the book to allow me to do that? And I started off by using the ones that I had seen, from street performers and, that type of, those types of entertainers, and then saying, right, how can I then make them a bit more unique to me? So over time, I'd added them into the character of Colin Cloud and made it tie together as part of what you're witnessing. And yeah, so I think that's definitely what I've carried over into this show, because when people are here with young kids, it needs to be fast, high energy. There needs to be things happening. And I think sometimes with mentalism, the process is usually just standing, staring, and, the migraine pose of death, looking at people. And I realized that you need to then give it more than that, so that even if there's a 4-year-old kid there's something visually funny for them, which is why I go over and, lick the woman's hand.
And you do. There are a number of times, I don't think there's, I always try and keep everything going. If there's much more than 30 seconds gone by that nothing's happening or nothing really stands out, the attention span weighs. I was that way, when I was your age, as I can say. I just wanted to grab the people. But you mentioned about your character, or you did say who is Colin Cloud, and you defined it. I think you defined it over the past few years more than most people would define it. And you've seemed to settled on something. What do you call this quote unquote character that you have developed?
Unfinished, first of all. But in what capacity? What do you mean?
On stage, when you step on stage, people know that they've never seen anything like you. You've put together a package, head to toe, and you project something. What is that you project?
I imagine if Sherlock Holmes were real, and in this show, what would that be like? How would he dress? How would he present himself? What would he look like? How would he treat people? What would he perform? What would that skill set?
So Sherlock Holmes live is what you want to bring.
Totally, yeah.
But was Sherlock Holmes something that you've always had? You wanted to channel? Is it something recent?
I did worry recently. I went through this crisis like maybe 5 or 6 years ago when Sherlock became big again. I thought, have I just done this have I imagined that I've always been into this? But no, when I go back and look at the interviews, when I was like younger doing this stuff, I think I was 16 in one news story, I talk about Sherlock all the way through it. So it's like, no, this has always been the thing, So to then now get to really embellish that, to now have been asked by, Mark Gatiss and the BBC guys to go be part of the Sherlock show and consult for the, the internet part of that. It's surreal and wonderful that what I've been doing has clearly been right on some level.
But now, have you always taken, like, for instance, the dress? You've obviously have the tattoos showing, but you do put a little bit of that retro Victorian tie shirt thing together that sort of is a little. So it's like you're hip, but yet you're retro. Is that all conscious, or did you?
Oh, totally. And when I start so I'm on stage maybe 4 or 5 times in the show, as in not just performing, but seen on stage. And it's very conscious that when I first walk out, the tattoos are not on show. You see me in a suit, so people think, okay, smart. Then I walk out at the end of the first half, and at that point, I've still got the tie and the vest, but the sleeves are rolled up, so now people looking catch the tattoos. Then I go out, and the tie comes off, and the shirt's open, so that it's now more loose, and I'm in the zone. And then it gets tighter as the show goes. So no, I've very consciously thought about how do I want to look in those modes of, if Sherlock were really hyper, he wouldn't be all,
staunchy and
exactly,
boring, yeah.
You need to be loose so he can move about and I do move about, I hope, a lot, so that I work the full
You move
room.
about more than most performers I've ever seen. So yes, you've got plenty of energy coming out.
Yeah.
Yes, there's no. Now, as far as the writing, on tour now for the past few years we've been working together. There's quite often I say, "What are you doing tonight?" or "What you got going?" and you would say, "Oh, I'm writing." Mm-hmm. Now, I come from comedy club days where people always say, "Yes, I'm writing," and which I'm not really a writer. I do jot down ideas, I get in my head, but I'm more of a cerebral writer. I think about things a lot, and every now and then I will jot things down. But I know guys who write everything down and have, Charlie Fry's a writer, 65 volumes, this thick of ideas. And when you write, are you a cerebral writer, or do you actually write everything down and you have journals as well?
So I'm quite cerebral during the day, where I'll be in situations like when we're in airports, I'll see things happen and think, oh, that leads to that, and I'll email myself. And I don't use any of the apps, because I think if I use the apps, I forget I've done it. Whereas if I email myself, I see it in my inbox that there's a message there. So it's conscious, right, I need to go back. And so the nights where I tell you I'm writing, that's me collating all that stuff, thinking back to what the hell did that mean? And if I can remember why it was funny, then I know it's good enough to develop further. And if I forget or it's not funny anymore, I'm like, okay, delete. But then I spend some nights thrashing out those ideas and embellishing them and holding on to them. And now that we're 50 days away from the Edinburgh Festival starting, so I write a new 1-hour show every year. And when we get to this point, I now start taking that stuff, working out what routine. Well, first of all, I work out the show. What is the show concept? As a result, what routines have I never done before? Ideally, what routines has no one ever done before that will fit that concept? I'll plan that out, and then when I get the backbone of the show, I then look at the things that I've written, whether it be, philosophical things, comedic things, meaningful things. I'll work out where do they slot into the backbone now of the show, and they all get placed. Then I'll maybe give it a few days and then go back to it, and if I can read it again and it still makes sense in that order, I'll know I'm onto something. And then it's a case of, like I said earlier, about ironing out all the wrinkles in it, and then linking it more together.
Yeah. So it seems like you follow the process of a traditional person who's writing a book. You start with your overall idea, and then you go through the chapters, and every chapter has its premise. And would you agree that mentalism is pretty much all premise as far as the effectiveness? I mean, are you telling the story? Is that more important?
Well, I think the only trick we're really performing as mentalists is to convince them that we can actually do what we say we're doing. And that's the only trick.
And reading their minds.
Yeah. Right? If it's mind reading, if that's the trick, then okay, so now the hour is, I'll prove that I can do that, which, is what I was doing years ago, which for a concept is, I think it can wear thin pretty quickly, because there hits a point where the 20 minutes in the audience go, right, we get it, you can do it. But then I think they think, what's in it for me? Or how does this benefit me? To an extent, if you're
and
playing
that's how
serious,
you can actually entertain for an hour or more, is you have to relate everything to them and make it interesting all the time.
Yeah, I think the first part is them buying into you. And until they buy into you, they won't buy into what you're selling, essentially. So the first part of whatever I do is getting them on board with me. And when I know we're in that place, or when I know when I'm writing, I can go, right, at that point in the show, I sure as hell hope they're on board. Because now we're going to take this, now that they know that they're in safe hands, and I can do this.
How long do you give an audience before you know that they're either on board or not on board?
I think, first 30 seconds you can feel, if you don't get that spark. There's 2 levels. One is on board with me as an individual, and I feel like after 30 seconds, you've got that 30 seconds to prove this is worth your 1 hour being here. And then I've spent another 15 minutes-ish building on that to prove to them that, I can do this. And after they're on board with not just me, but my skill set, then I introduce the theme of the show. and the next 45 minutes is all about that. And that for me now is the place where it takes it somewhere quite interesting. And
then you have the story. Then it builds.
yeah.
We talked about this, and I liked your sort of response, which I sort of figured was what it could be the response when we were talking about methodology and what's happening now with mentalism with all the electronics. It's almost like anybody can be a god if you have the money. And it's the simplest, I mean, simpler than, a regular French drop in magic. I mean, there's stuff that just, if you got the money, you can buy the methods and it works.
Yeah.
Almost all the time. So, but then you mentioned, as you said, well, that's, I believe if I'm right, you said something to the effect of, well, that's why I'm trying to get away from all that, because everyone's doing it.
Well, yeah, I mean, the guys that are creating these electronics, it is amazing. But I almost think the people who rely on them fully are doing the ballsiest type of mentalism, because there will be a day where some of that stuff just doesn't work. And then it's like, where are you going to go? So I'm doing Edinburgh, and I wrote my tour out last night, and I looked at the effects I'm doing, and at the moment, if I stick with what I've written for that 75 minutes, there's not one electronic effect in there, which, I'm proud of. I'm not saying that that's the right way, but I also love the fact that I don't rely on it.
And it's guaranteed that it's going to work.
Well, yeah. The stress. Every method I'm using because I know if in the moment it doesn't work, I know I can fix it. But if I'm using something electronic in the moment, if it doesn't work, I mean, I can get by with technology and, to a proficient level, but if something goes down electronic, well, I have no idea what I'm doing. And
Well, I think if you're using electronics, I mean, the best thing you can do is also then figure out a backup to everything you got.
But then often the backup is just as good, because if they really believe that I'm doing this anyway, then the method's irrelevant, I hope. So if the method then isn't as focused on, and if that backup is as good, as what you're doing already anyway, then it's kind of like, well...
Right. Exactly.
Do you want me to repeat that?
Yeah.
Yeah. From the backup bit, do you think? Talking about that?
Yeah, backup bit.
Yeah. But I think often the backup should at least be just as good as there will always be a compromise somewhere, but I think if the backup method is pretty much just as good as the electronic method, then in my opinion now, I would rather just focus on making the backup as good and as deceptive as it can be, and I would just use that off the bat.
Sure, exactly. I understand. Okay, so to wrap this up, I do have a question I've asked all the other illusionists here on tour, and all the illusionists that were chosen for the show were chosen because Simon Painter, he likes things that if it doesn't entertain him, and he has the attention span of a gnat, and he'll tell you that. So I mean, I want to know what your perception is of why would most magicians not be comparable to work in the Illusionists?
Wow.
Or most mentalists, most magicians, most entertainers. Why? What do we have they don't? What should they do if they really do want to try out for it or be in a show like this?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different things we could talk about here. One is why we get into magic. One is how the typical magician behaves, and magic. I'll admit. I mean, I think magic attracts people who are a bit socially awkward. And I'll admit, when I was younger, I was a freaking weirdo. I got lucky that I went to university young. That's assuming I'm not a weirdo anymore, by the way. But I went to university young, and by chance got in with the group of guys at university who were a bit cool. And not just that, they were very aware. They were great at being in a situation and noticing things that were happening, tying it into what we were chatting about, like good comedians. Like, they were just really aware. And I feel like so often magicians, mentalists are focused on looking down at shuffling the cards, at a table, or working on, the move with the nail right, or whatever it is. And it's so much of that, and as a result, that becomes a barrier between them and the people, rather than as a means of further connecting. And I think a lot of people, magicians, rely on the magic first before they actually learn to engage people. I hope the best performers in Illusionists could stand on that stage and be thoroughly entertaining, even on a night where none of the tricks worked. It would still be an amazing show. It would still be hilarious, funny, engaging. There'd still be some smart moments, some takeaway for the audience. I'm not saying that that would be my ideal illusionist evening, nothing working, but the people who we have on that stage, you know, they have that ability to capture an audience. And I think some people rely on the tricks before they learn those people skills. And again, I got lucky that I managed to hang out with people who were really good at that and learned a lot from that. Then I got into comedy and learned, you know, where it connects with that world, the entertainment world, and really tried to hone that.
So you've had your stage time of before you really started getting your show. I mean, you that's the thing which I always say. I think when you go through and really spend hours and hours getting stage time, there's no substitute for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big point is finding these venues that are hard to work, and when your material works in those venues and you can still capture the audience, you're going to come here and you'll fly because you've then found it. Also, the biggest bit of advice, and this was from Ken Weber's book, Maximum Entertainment. He introduced me to a guy called David Gerard a few years ago, and David and I, about similar age, and we have a private YouTube channel. Every performance we do, we'll put up there, and we'll give each other notes and critique it, and we'll be brutally honest, not to be offensive, but because we want to improve. And unless you have someone who is willing to help you and wants to help you, and they're giving you this feedback for the right reasons, then you know you're going to be delusional your full career if you don't have that. And if you can't take that honesty, you're never going to allow yourself the chance to fully develop. So I honestly cannot recommend enough that people watching this find someone that they do have that relationship with, that they do trust the person, but they can be honest and offer perspective on how to make things more unique, different from other people, the way that they're doing things, offer ideas to encourage, you know, more inspiring avenues, to take concepts, whatever you're talking about, to improve jokes, to improve moments. So it doesn't just all have to be funny, but the intense moments, how do you make them more intense? The emotional moments, how do they become more heartfelt? And, you know, not just making a funnier thing, but like all of these things, how can we improve all that? And then when you've got someone you can bounce that off and trust, then you're going to make it, you know, much more effective for yourself and your audiences.
Right. Well, I think this was a master's class in Performing Arts 101 here, up to the thesis. This is great. Thank you very much, Colin Cloud.
Thank you for people who tuned in for the full interview. Sorry you had to endure that if you didn't like it.
He's so stressed.
I know. Jesus, gonna do my eyeliner now. I mean, what's all that about? Jesus. And hairspray. That's the real secret. Enjoy.